You're listening to Xenia 74, 9 Minutes in April, a special documentary here on AM 1290 and News 95.7 WHIO.
It was Wednesday afternoon, April 3rd, 1974. You might say a typical spring day in Xenia. Reds baseball was about to begin. The Xenia High School Drama Department was rehearsing their spring play. And the top song that week on WHIO Radio was John Denver's Sunshine on My Shoulders. But that day, the sunshine would disappear, and a dark cloud would begin to form and spin and take aim at Greene County.
The weather radar now shows a tornado developing in northeastern Warren County, taking it from northeastern Warren County into southeastern Montgomery County into central Greene County.
That's the voice of legendary WHIO-TV weather specialist Gil Whitney, who at the time was tracking the mounting storm on WHIO's instant weather radar as it moved across the southern portion of the Miami Valley. The tornado first formed southwest of Xenia near Bellbrook around 4:30 p.m. Within moments of recognizing the signature hook echo of a funnel cloud on the radar, instead of waiting for the National Weather Service to issue an official warning, Gil Whitney went right on the air to warn viewers who were in its path, urging them to seek shelter and brace for the storm.
This storm is severe, a massive storm. The track indicated by the hook in our radar screen is now moving into the city of Xenia.
Whitney's keen eye and quick decisions that afternoon saved countless lives. Thousands of people and families, including my own, heeded his warning. Though he was able to see the hook echo on the radar, there was still some uncertainty in the public as to which portion of Greene County would be in the path of the storm. Radar was certainly a gift that day, but pinpoint accuracy for a storm of this magnitude could be tricky. My family lived in Beaver Creek, in a neighborhood just off of North Fairfield Road. I was 4 years old and remember being outside playing with friends and seeing my dad frantically pull into the driveway. He immediately called me home, took me inside, herded my mom and my baby sister, and marched us to an interior room on the lowest floor of our tri-level house. He then ran upstairs, grabbed a twin mattress off my bed, brought it back down, and put it over the top of our heads. We sat there, and we had a little transistor radio tuned to WHIO, and I remember hearing the tones of the emergency broadcast system and the announcers reading the tornado warning from the National Weather Service. I don't remember how long we stayed sheltered in the basement. My dad went outside to keep an eye on the southwest sky. Of course, the storm stayed south and never came near Beaver Creek, but the experience that afternoon left me with a healthy respect for weather warnings and the hard work meteorologists do to keep us safe. When the wrath of nature strikes, as we saw recently in the March outbreak of tornadoes that took lives and caused so much devastation in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, it holds nothing back. It plays no favorites. At 4:40 in the afternoon that April day in 1974, and in a matter of moments, the people of Xenia and the entirety of the Miami Valley would learn this lesson all too well for themselves. What you're hearing is actual audio of the tornado, recorded by a Xenia resident who held a microphone outside his apartment window until the storm got too close for safety, and he dropped the mic and ran for shelter. Even with Gil Whitney's on-air warnings, most of the people in the storm's path were caught off guard. Winds reached 300 miles per hour. The storm, estimated between 500 and 1,100 yards wide, sank into the soul of Xenia and charged its way through neighborhoods, farm fields, and downtown city blocks. The debris seen flying in the air was a mixture of earth, metal, and wood, and the personal effects of thousands of people and families. Homes in some neighborhoods were completely swept off their slabs, revealing the foundation, the only visible proof a house and family had once lived there. Family photographs, heirlooms, and other personal property were sucked up into the storm and often dropped hundreds of yards away. The walls from countless homes sailed through the air like sheets of paper blowing on a breeze. Utility poles snapped like matchsticks, stringing partially dead power lines throughout the city. Splintering lumber, nails, metal pipes, and broken bricks became missiles launched in every direction, impaling anything that stood in its line of trajectory. Cars, trucks, buses, and even train cars were tossed about, landing in backyards, family rooms, and classrooms. Trees that lined the streets, some more than 100 years old, were uprooted as easily as a child picking a dandelion. Many people who were huddled in their basements, crawl spaces, bathrooms, and closets described the sound of the twister like that of a freight train or a continuous deafening wall of thunder. But everyone who heard it that day agreed it was the voice of a killer. It would take only 9 minutes to level a city that took 170 years to build and change the lives of nearly 25,000 people. The destruction people encountered as they emerged from the rubble was unspeakable. But they weren't alone in their shock and awe. Throughout the country, people in 13 states were dealing with the aftermath of 148 tornadoes. In all, during April 3rd and 4th, 330 people were killed and nearly 5,500 were injured in what the weather experts call a super outbreak. In Xenia, the F5 storm, the strongest and most destructive on the Vegeta rating scale, claimed 33 lives. Half of the city's structures were leveled, including 4 schools. At Xenia High School, fate seemed to intervene and save over a dozen lives. Students and an instructor were rehearsing a play on stage when one of them wandered into the hallway to find the water fountain. She spotted the storm through a window bearing down on the school and yelled to the others. In that moment, as they were looking out the window, the roof of the auditorium was peeled off and a school bus dropped directly on the stage where they had been standing only moments before. Earlier in the day, over 2,000 students were in attendance at the school. It was said if the storm had struck a few hours earlier, the likely fatalities would have been catastrophic. Dozens of downtown businesses along Main and Detroit Street were turned into rubble, with the contents of the stores dropped throughout the city. The flimsy structure of an A&W root beer stand was no match for the furious force of the tornado's winds. 5 people, including a mother, father, and small child, lost their lives there. One person who survived at the root beer stand is Janie Hall. She was 5 at the time and says a guardian angel was with her that day.
I remember a lady coming out and saying there was a tornado, and I didn't know what a tornado was. And then we went, the lady said, come in and take cover, there's a tornado. So we all ran inside the building and remember getting underneath the table.
That angel was a woman named Dorothy Rowland, who laid on top of Janie and protected her from the flying debris. Dorothy Rowland died that day in Xenia. At the time the storm struck, a 57-car Penn Central freight train was rumbling through Xenia. The tornado tossed the cars, leaving them in piles as though a child had thrown them in a tantrum. Many of the boxcars landed in the street, blocking immediate access to some areas of town, delaying rescue efforts by first responders and volunteers. Clyde Hyatt, a Penn Central worker, was driving through Xenia when the storm hit. He stopped his car in the middle of the road after seeing a little girl standing alone and scared. He exited his car and rushed to save her, but the storm took both of them, their bodies later found amongst nearby debris. At Central State University in Wilberforce, just a few miles east of Xenia, 15 buildings, most of them classrooms, were toppled. The Central State Student Union was spared, but severely damaged. Several students found refuge there from the storm, then emerged afterwards to help the injured. 10 churches also laid in the path of the storm. At the First Church of the Nazarene, 100 preschoolers and their teachers had been crouched down in a small basement singing "Jesus Loves Me" as the twister roared through their town. Miles Back was one of those students.
I remember being huddled in that basement forever, hands over the head, in the dark, and it seems like there was an adult on top of me at all times, because I remember I kept saying, I don't want another tomato. I don't want another tomato. That's the only word I could come up with that it sounded like.
Perhaps the most devastating and heartbreaking toll of the storm was the destruction of over 1,300 homes. Some more than a century old, small mid-century ranch homes to Victorian-era structures were tossed and toppled like dollhouses. Many people were left with no refuge, having lost their home, their office, their church, and the city they relied on. The chaos that followed was unimaginable. Families were separated, and damaged phone lines made it impossible to make contact. Fathers and mothers who had been at work in other parts of the Miami Valley came racing home to Xenia to look for their families. Miles back, the little boy who was crouched down in a church daycare remembers wondering where his parents were at the time.
And I remember it kept running through my head, why isn't my mom coming to get me? Because a lot of the kids were getting picked up by their parents. And I just kept thinking, well, my mom's not coming to get me. What's going on? What's going on? Well, she was trying to get me, but she couldn't get there.
Unable to navigate through the debris, many people abandoned their cars and took off on foot, frantically searching for their loved ones, dodging broken glass, dangerously sharp debris, and the fumes of leaking gas lines. Most found their families and neighbors safe, but not everyone was as fortunate. Trumbull Street, located several blocks southwest of downtown Xenia, was hit particularly hard by the storm. A man and woman, both 82 years of age, and 3 children, 8, 7, and 3, all from the same family, were killed that day in Xenia. Chuck Haynes was 4 years old when the storm hit. He was at a babysitter's house on Trumbull Street.
The babysitter's husband came in from the outside after he had been watching the neighbors, and to me he went wild. He grabbed his kids, he grabbed my sister, and started throwing everybody in the basement, and at that time I didn't have any clue as to what happened or what was going on. And I froze. I didn't move, I didn't run. He snatched me up and put us all down in the basement and pulled the door closed. And then we heard a loud thunder, and after that we dug our way out. And at that point you could tell it was a storm. And I asked if it could come back, and they said no, it can't come back. And I remember seeing light sky on one side and dark sky on the other.
When we return, the relief and rescue efforts begin, and the human cost of the storm begins to add up. Plus, local and state officials come to the aid of Xenia, as does the President of the United States. You're listening to a special WHIO radio presentation, Xenia 74, 9 minutes in April.
You're listening to Xenia 74, 9 minutes in April, a special documentary here on AM 1290 and News 95.7 WHIO.
My name is Tood Hollst. I'm your host. Joining me in the studio is AM 1290 and News 95.7 WHIO newsman Jason Michaels. Jason has a very special memory of WHIO-TV weather specialist Gil Whitney and the Xenia 74 tornado.
I was a senior in high school on the day of the tornado. In fact, I was on the air at our high school radio station at Miamisburg that afternoon, taking note of the devastation, which is what I had from AP reports that were called into us by another station in Miamisburg. And having met Gil, I want to say it was a couple of months before that, we decided at one point that we put in a call to him at the station, even though we really weren't expecting to hear back from him. But we did leave this call in at the station, and I can't remember the exact time. Sometime after the evening news was over with, the phone at the radio station rang, and it was Gil on the other end.
Wow. So this guy who you just met briefly,
right,
thought of you enough to give you a call,
yeah,
and perform his duty as a weather specialist,
right,
and share the information that he knew about the storm and the aftermath,
right,
with you guys.
It was about a minute and a half conversation, but it was very welcomed by everybody.
But it made a lasting impression on you, obviously.
Why, sure, because in the probably one of the worst hours when everything was going crazy, he actually took the time to help out a high school kid.
Right. What are your memories specifically of the storm? I would assume that at some point afterwards, you probably made it to Xenia to see what was going on and do some reporting.
Well, actually, that evening, some of my fellow students were part-time ambulance drivers, and they were calling in to me, telling me what they were seeing.
Wow.
So, and then the storms, of course, didn't just end with that one tornado. That outbreak went on for what seemed like an eternity.
Right. You know, the reports that I've talked about in this documentary is that over those 2 days, April 3rd and 4th, there were roughly 140-some tornadoes throughout the Midwest,
right,
hitting 13 different states. And in fact, we're going to talk about this a little bit later in this presentation, where there was actually a scare of another tornado heading to Xenia.
And there was, and I can also tell you that, of course, I couldn't sleep that night.
Sure.
As a child, I was deathly afraid of tornadoes. And I had WHIO radio on a transistor radio underneath my pillow. And I want to say it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe 2:30 in the morning. The announcer got on the air. It might have been Bob Sweeney. I don't remember, but because I do know he was doing the overnight show. But I remember the announcer saying, if you are listening in Miamisburg, take cover immediately. It was blowing real hard at that point. Ran into my parents and I said, "Hey, Mom, Dad, get up. We gotta take cover." And they basically said, "Go back to sleep."
No tornado ever formed.
No.
And fortunately, this area was spared another hit.
Yeah, they saw, I guess, a radar signature or something that concerned them. So,
well, Jason, thank you so much for chatting with us.
My pleasure.
When we return, we will hear from people who actually were in the Xenia tornado and share some of their experiences and what they saw. Also, we'll hear from Kirsty Zontini, WHIO Radio and News Center 7 meteorologist, about the challenges of predicting tornadoes back in 1974 and the tools they use today to help keep us all safe.
You're listening to Xenia 74, 9 minutes in April. A special documentary here on AM 1290 and News 95.7 WHIO. You're listening to Xenia 74, 9 minutes in April. A special documentary here on AM 1290 and News 95.7 WHIO.
Within hours of the storm, the rescue and relief efforts began. People from all over the Miami Valley came to help, moving debris, clothing the disheveled, and aiding in the recovery of those lost. Almost immediately, the National Guard was on the scene, establishing a command center and working to restore hope and security. Martial law was ordered, and curfews were strictly enforced. Many survivors to this day vividly recall the sound of military helicopters flying overhead nearly 24 hours a day. As night began to fall on April 3rd, the devastated community was once again thrown into panic when guardsmen driving through city streets issued warnings of another reported tornado heading towards the city. People ran for the middle of town, heading towards the Xenia courthouse to seek shelter. The stone structure, built in 1902, survived the tornado's wrath and offered some of the only protection in the city. Luckily, a second tornado never formed. The tornado that day was not only a Xenia event, but an event the entire Miami Valley had to come to grips with. Beaver Creek and Fairborn schools opened their doors up to Xenia students whose schools had been destroyed. The Red Cross mobilized volunteers from near and far to pass out food to residents. Students at area high schools held clothing drives and donated all sorts of household supplies for victims. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base came to the aid of Xenia, taking in an overflow of patients from Green Memorial Hospital. Other hospitals in Springfield and Dayton took on the responsibility not only of treating the injured, but helping those families reconnect after being separated in the chaos. Lists of the injured were posted in hospital cafeterias where family and friends could find their loved ones. For many local organizations and emergency agencies, it really became an all-hands-on-deck event. It began with 2 Centerville police officers tracking the funnel cloud from southern Montgomery County into Greene County. Their radio reports were being monitored by other local agencies, and they all quickly reacted to the urgency of the moment and raced to Xenia. Volunteers ranging from Box 21 Rescue to doctors and nurses, construction workers and bulldozer drivers, food distributors, and even area dog catchers came to Xenia to offer their assistance. With any relief effort after a catastrophe, first responders and volunteers face countless dangers. 3 days following the tornado, a fire broke out at the Cherry Furniture Store on West Main Street, downtown. 2 National Guardsmen sleeping in the basement were unable to escape the flames. The cause of the fire was a kerosene heater being knocked over. Donald Meek, a member of the 178th Fighter Wing, which came to the aid of Xenia, was in the basement only minutes before the fire was detected. He spoke to WHIO-TV in 2004 about his experience.
I heard about it when I got up command post. It said what happened. And I said, man, I was just there in this couch up top of the steps where they said where the flames had come up in that area. It just got through to me how the Lord had seemed to have spared me, but didn't spare them. It was hard.
Many state officials came to see the destruction for themselves and to offer assistance, assessment, and assurances to the people of Xenia. News Center 7's longtime news anchor Jim Baldridge had just started at WHIO-TV and was one of the first to interview then Ohio Governor John Gilligan.
Governor Gilligan, what is your assessment of the situation here in Xenia?
Well, the tornado evidently went virtually right through the middle of the town from the southwest, moving in a northeasterly direction, and cut a swath maybe 3 city blocks wide.
A few days later, President Richard Nixon came to Xenia to see the devastation for himself. His helicopter landed in a nearby field, and people surrounded him as he spoke to WHIO about the resilience of the people he had met.
We have received a big lift from coming here, interestingly enough. People have been very kind to say thank you for coming. You help us. You help our morale, somebody said to me. Well, let me say that when we come here and find people who have suffered so much in such a devastating way, with the outlook rather bleak, but who are still standing up there tall and strong and saying they're going to see it through, it makes you realize that this country has got a lot of guts. It makes you realize that this town is going to live. It makes you realize that this town is going to come back.
To many of the people in the aftermath of the tornado of April 3, 1974, the images of the day are burned in their memories in vivid detail.
Went and looked out my back door to see if it was what I thought it was, and so I just kept looking, and there it was, and it was just getting louder and louder and louder, and so I knew what it was.
We were standing in the house getting ready to eat supper, and my brother-in-law called us and said there's a tornado on its way, and I went outside, seen it swerving around, seeing housetops coming up and everything.
We came out of the basement, and the first 2 things I seen was the Xenia High School, and man, I tell you, that got to me.
The cleanup process was lengthy and massive. It took more than 3 months to haul off the vast majority of the debris. I remember driving through Xenia several weeks after the tornado with my mom and grandmother. I sat in the back seat, looking out the window as we navigated through the town, taking in all the destruction. I remember seeing trees uprooted, which was something I'd never seen before. I had no idea tree roots reached as far from the trunk as the branches. It looked alien. I remember the smell. It was a mix of wet wood, gasoline, and mud. Homes, businesses, schools, and churches, once a big part of the fabric of Xenia, were bulldozed and buried in a stark quarry 10 miles north of town. The cost of the storm reached over $200 million. Every segment of society was touched by the destruction. For many, it created a bond between black, white, rich, poor. They were all victims standing side by side, uncertain about their futures, but certain of their resolve. Southwestern Ohio may not officially be part of what's known as Tornado Alley, but hardly does a storm season pass without at least one tornado warning in the Miami Valley. Fortunately, since that time, science and technology has vastly improved. Though imperfect, it has given meteorologists more tools and time to get the word out about approaching storms. AM 1290 and News 95.7 WHIO and News Center 7 meteorologist Kirsty Zontini explains how the technology has improved since the days of Gil Whitney.
Yeah, it was honestly almost archaic to think of just how old school things were back then. What was really amazing was the fact that we were one of the local stations that actually had a radar that Gil was able to use. You probably have heard or have seen the infamous hook echo, which is the thunderstorm that gets that hook.
Right.
Well, those were really important radar signatures of that time because radar technology back then had it showed nothing about movement of thunderstorms. It just showed the position. And what I find even more fascinating was back then in the mid-'70s, there was actually a National Weather Service office in Cincinnati, but Dayton also had one, and they covered middle of Ohio. And the Cincinnati Weather Service office had a radar, but Dayton did not. So they actually had a piece of technology that let those Dayton meteorologists also look. And what was very interesting was the fact that those thunderstorms were so strong and well-developed and had such well-developed rotation that they did have hook echoes. We don't often see, we've had tornadoes here.
Right.
We don't get that very, very defined signature. So it just showed how powerful that environment was during that outbreak that we had, I think they said about 5 hook echoes at one point in that Southwest Ohio region. And then the big, strong one was the one in Xenia.
The thing that I find so interesting is you talk about this radar, that technology not really being able to show movement.
Yes.
So it would seem to me that Gil Whitney that day was making a very educated guess as to where and how the direction of this funnel cloud was moving. He was basically operating in the blind.
Right. It was what was very interesting as well was the fact that what was very important back then and now were storm spotter reports. So seeing a thunderstorm develop and getting a lot of the ground truth from law enforcement, and they were all calling each other and very much communicating that they had seen the storm here and there was a funnel cloud. Well, now it's here. Well, of course, now it's moving northeast. So you're able to keep using that northeast motion from reports that people were sending in. And storm spotters are super important to this day as well.
Sure.
But back then it really was a big deal because the radar they were using was pre-Doppler radar, which allows us now to not only see placement, but also see movement. So we could see if targets are moving away or towards a radar, which nowadays lets us see if the winds are moving towards or away from a radar. And that gives us something called a velocity couplet, which is a big radar signature that you'll hear a lot of, I don't want to say modern, but I guess modern meteorologists speak about now.
One of the things that I love about the technology that we currently have is, and I've seen this on TV many times, where they are really able to drill down into a neighborhood and a street and say, hey, if you're on, Route 48 in southern Montgomery County, you are about to experience XYZ, and I just... It's so remarkable to me because I was alive during the tornado, and I've talked about my experience in this documentary. And I just remember my dad being outside with neighbors watching the sky because there was really no way to pinpoint. All we heard was the tornado is moving into Greene County towards Xenia, Ohio. Well, we were in Beaver Creek, so... it was like
what does that mean?
Just a little bit to the north, and all of a sudden you're in the path.
Yeah. And what was also crazy back then as well was just communication in general. Were you actually watching a television? Did you hear the tornado sirens going off? You didn't have a cell phone that was literally pinpointing and a polygon that is drawn that shows you where your location specifically is. And if you're in the polygon or out of it, the warning system has just increased. So when Doppler radar became widespread, available to all the National Weather Service offices across the country, was the late 90s. And from the late 90s to today, the warning time that we get, the lead time for a tornado warning, used to be 5 minutes, and now it's about 10, if not even more than that. That's a huge increase.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't seem like a lot when you look at the face of a clock, but
but it really is.
Think of what you can do in 5 minutes to prepare.
Yes.
I mean, when you hear a siren go off, I mean, I live in Xenia now, and over the last few years, the sirens have gone off probably 3 or 4 times, and you have plenty of time to react.
Exactly.
I have time to go out on the front porch and look to the sky and see, okay, what am I looking at?
Yeah.
Which you probably shouldn't do.
Right. Maybe not doing that. But yes, so of course, just even not only the lead time for warnings has increased so much, but the means of communication has just blown up for people. So like I said, sometimes you don't hear a tornado siren. They're great. They're super important tools, but it can't be the only line of defense you have for getting your weather information.
Sure.
That has improved leaps and bounds with cell phones, with weather radios, with your car radio, with the emergency alert systems that take over your television. So all of that has really improved as well outside of just the radar.
When we return, some scars from the tornado remain to this day. Plus, the resilience of Xenia thrives. You're listening to a special WHIO radio presentation, Xenia 74, 9 minutes in April.
You're listening to Xenia 74, 9 minutes in April. A special documentary here on AM 1290 and News 95.7 WHIO.
Scars from that day in April 1974 still remain to this day. Paul Evans, a Xenia farmer who spoke with News Center 7's Gabrielle Enright in 2004, talked about the remnants of the storm that were still visible on his property all those years later. His farm was directly in the path of the twister.
Well, explain to me what that is.
That's a piece of roofing off of somebody's house or barn. Been hanging there since '74. Right here, we're sitting right in the path of where the tornado went. That's what's just been hanging there. So I never went up to tear it down. I just said, the heck with it. You stay up there. Nature can do strange things to us real fast. Real fast, so never know.
Paul also found a page from a church hymnal floating in his field after the storm.
When the world's on fire and the darkness veils the sun, I'll live on. Yes, I'll live on. Men will cry and to the rocks and mountains run. I will live on. Yes, I will live on.
33 people died in the Xenia tornado. The youngest, a 1-month-old infant boy. The oldest, a 98-year-old woman. Nearly 1,600 people were injured. To those who survived the storm, the names of the dead posted on a plaque outside Xenia City Hall serves as a reminder of a shared ordeal, an unforgettable event tying those who lived through it together and giving them a common bond. It was this common bond and bold perseverance that brought Xenia back from ruin. Today, I make Xenia my home. There's no question the city and people who lived through the tornado were changed forever. Some neighbors I've met become nostalgic when they talk about Xenia prior to the storm. Some maybe even think Xenia's best days are behind her. But as someone who's only been there for 5 short years, I see things very differently. Certainly, like many small Miami Valley communities, it has its challenges. But what I've found are people who are eager to improve the quality of life and continue down the road of progress. There is a strong spirit alive and well amongst many in the community, folks who continue to push forward from that fateful day, April 3rd, 1974. The phrase, Xenia lives, was plastered all over the city in the months that followed the tornado. It may have only been a slogan on a bumper sticker or graffiti sprayed on a destroyed home, but it truly serves as a reminder to the strength and determination of those who call this Miami Valley community home. You've been listening to a special WHIO radio presentation, Xenia 74, 9 minutes in April. My name is Tood Hollst. Thanks for listening.